You're listening to the UKC Hunting Ops Podcast, celebrating hunting dog heritage, competition, and community. United Kennel Club has been the hunting dog sports home for coonhounds, beagles, retrievers, pointers, cur, feist, and more for over 125 years.
Well, Jason, I appreciate you taking the time to join us this afternoon and talk a little bit about our Shed Dog rules. For the people tuning in that don't know who Jason is, he is one of the members of our advisory board. He's one of the individuals that we look to when we're trying to continuously make this sport the best that it can be and help it continue to grow on the trajectory it's been on for the past few years. Jason, if you don't mind, introduce yourself to those that are listening and give a brief background on your past in the world of Shed Dog.
So when we started, when I got into Shed Dogs, actually, I wasn't interested in competition. I knew that at the time there was only the NASHDA events, and we got our dog Remy, and she was really good, and the trainer suggested we try it, and that's been many years ago, and we were hooked at our first event, been doing it ever since. And then once the UKC started, got into that. I think in the early days, it was a little bit of a time before we got into it. It was kind of already going, but we've been involved since the early days and love the sport. Leaving this weekend, Friday to go to Wisconsin.
Oh, good deal. So, we mentioned our advisory board. So there's 3 individuals on that currently. We've got Scott Kuchenbecker, we've got Jason MacPherson here, and we've got Jeff Rada. When we sit down each year, we kind of look at the rules and see what needs tweaking. There's been some years that we've had some pretty sizable changes to the rule book, things that are pretty major alterations. This year really wasn't one of those years. We had some small tweaks here and there and some clarifying things, but all in all, it was a pretty mundane year as far as the rule changes go. Jason, I'm kind of curious, what have you seen as a competitor in the kind of effects of what we do here, what we do in those conversations with the advisory board? What are some examples that come to your mind of ways that we've improved this sport through that advisory board and through our rule tweaks?
Well, a lot of the rules come about just from experience. They say every time you create a new rule, you create at least one exception. And I think, we're starting season 8 now. So it's a fairly new sport and a new set of rules, and just through events and things happening, a weird situation will come up or we'll look at the way something's worded and realize we all understand what it means, but if you read it literally, it might be interpreted another way. So I think we're down to tweaking things like that now. But the basic set of rules have stayed the same. And as far as examples of how things have gotten better, I think we've tightened up the rules so that it's fair to all competitors. Everybody has an equal playing field. I think that's kind of been the focus of some of the discussions, just tightening things up, really. And right now it seems like we're just down to tweaking. I think we've improved the overall quality of the sport. Seems like from what I see, people have a really positive experience when they come to one of these events for the first time. And so I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think we keep narrowing down on getting to the point where all we need is really fine-tuned adjustments. And in the history of Shed Dog, I think there's been rule changes every year, and I think the goal for most sports, I think, is to minimize how often you need to do rule changes. A lot of other sports only have them, every 2 years, and then other older, longer established sports really only have them when things come up. And I think we're really closing in on the point where we don't need annual rule changes, but rather just review the state of the program each year and see what tweaks are needed. I kind of alluded to there being a little bit of a I would almost want to call it a big tweak, but it was probably one of the bigger changes to the rule book, and that was in reference to the youth handler points. Youth handler points hasn't really changed in a few years, and in the sport, whether it's at nationals or a weekend event that I might attend, or just feedback we get from competitors in the sport, the youth series seems to be overall pretty healthy. But one of the feedback we always got was, we really like if those kids that are participating are rewarded for being successful in some of the larger classes or the larger attended events. And so this year we did make that tweak to the youth handler points where it took on kind of the similar multiplier format that our Dog of the Year program took on. Now, those points are still earned at any youth class event that's held at all during the season, but it is a small tweak to try to further reward those young handlers that are really excelling in large classes. And so, really, I think that's one of the bigger changes from this past year. But, Jason, what, for those who don't know, you're a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
So, talk us through, from a lawyer's perspective, some of those tweaks as well.
Well, so for the youth handler, so for those who don't know, we have these discussions with the advisory board, and some of those conversations are 4 or 5 hour phone conversations where your ears hurting and your brain's fried at the end of it. And a lot of that has to do with the Dog of the Year program and the youth handler issues, because the whole idea has been trying to reward the dog that earns it. I think we all agree the principle of it is it's a prestigious award, either for the youth handler or for the Dog of the Year programs. And I think the whole idea is that we want to award the dogs that are achieving that recognition and have earned it. And so coming up with a point system and a way to do it has been the challenge. And so there's been that's been the major tweaking over the last couple of years. And so as far as this year, the youth handler, I think we wanted to recognize that there were youth handlers out there who are competitive and are actually very good handlers who practice and work with their dogs. And we wanted a way to recognize those kids who are doing well with their dogs and actually working with them. Then you've got, because you've kind of got a separate class of kids that are just in it to have fun. They'll use whoever's dog's there. It's more of a fun thing, but then you have the more competitive youth. And I think this point structure was an idea. The idea behind it was to try to recognize those kids that are actually competitive. So that was the major idea behind that. I think it's kind of structured, like you said, similar to the way we're doing Dog of the Year, which, again, that's been a lot of our discussion is how to tweak that program. And I really feel like over the last couple of years, we've greatly improved that program. It was to the point I was pretty frustrated with the whole thing because it was creating a little bit of negative sideshow. It didn't seem like it was working well, and I really feel like we've hammered that out. I'm hoping this last season was better than it has been. Hoping this season's even better. So some of the other changes were, I think one of the main changes was that we didn't want to allow dogs to run on a leash. That actually came up at an event I was at, It wasn't in the champion class; it was in the working class. And somebody came up. I was judging champion, and somebody wanted to run a working dog, and I don't know that the rule really specifies one way or the other. There were some ways you could interpret other portions of the rules that would seem to prohibit it, but it wasn't clear. And I think the discussion we had in our advisory board was that it creates the possibility, a handler can jerk on the leash or, signal to the dog, and it would cause a problem. You're not allowed to guide a dog directly to a shed. Well, if you're on a leash, it's there's some problems with that. So I think the overall idea was that, look, if your dog's not ready to run off leash, maybe you need to work on it a little bit, even in the working class. So the rule was just clarified to specifically state that the dog can't run on a leash, which, again, that wasn't clear. One of the other changes was about the dog not, or the handler not being allowed to leave the starting gate prior to the dog beginning the run. I didn't really ever see anything like that, but I guess the possibility was that a handler could enter the course before the dog, and so we just wanted to make it clear that once you're at the starting gate, the handler may not leave until the run has began. That's not real. Again, those are minor tweaks, and everybody kind of understood that.
Yeah.
But,
and it's one of those things that it came up as a question, and someone say, well, I don't see it in the rules, and so I didn't have a clear understanding of it. And you kind of touched on it. There's a couple factors that play there, and you mentioned control. These dogs should exhibit some decent level of control, if for nothing else than their own safety and the safety of those attending the event. The safety of the dog on lead that can create some complications, and furthermore, the consistency of it. When we talk about the starting gate, you want everyone to have the same opportunity to post their best time on the course. And so by ensuring that we're maintaining a consistent understanding of the rules as a whole and this rule specifically, we're able to alleviate some discussion on the course or discussion with the judge on, hey, stop my clock, I have a question on that. And so that's kind of the driving force behind these minor clarifications, and it's just to ensure consistency, ensure fairness, and ensure the safety of the competitors and dogs.
Yeah, and that's just for example, after we concluded our advisory board discussions for this year, it was brought to my attention that it's not clear on when the clock starts, and there's a potential for a rule discussion next year. But those are just that's a little tweak. One of the other rules that came up that was amended, and this was something that I saw, and it was actually something I had done myself. A lot of times antlers at the end of the run, a handler would throw an antler to reward the dog. Because in our sport, there's actually no natural prey drive for these dogs to want to go find and pick up sheds. And to reward them, their payoff was, hey, if I throw the antler, they like to chase. And I actually had done that myself. But it was discussed that, hey, our rules also require that we sent these antlers up, down the main beam, on the pedicle, up a tine. So we're putting a lot of scent on these antlers. We're throwing them around on the course. We're leaving, residual scent, which can distract dogs. And in our sport, literally, a lot of times the placements are decided by fractions of seconds. So a dog that gets distracted by a residual scent could, have otherwise placed. So it was discussed that we should not allow the tossing of the antlers as a reward, and that's what we decided on. And I think that's a good idea. There is residual scent that's left behind by these antlers, and it's just to make it fair for everybody. Just one of those, again, a minor tweak, something that nobody ever really thought of before. But as we get more experience with this program and this
more
hey, this could be an issue. So, and the dogs, the dogs are getting faster and faster. We're going to probably reach a point where they simply can't run any faster. But, and so like I said, we're getting down to fractions of seconds and having to tighten things up a little bit on that one.
Sure, and there's a subset of people who are competing in the group that placements aren't necessarily their end all goal. They're just out there enjoying the time with their dog. They're playing for passes, and the way that this rule is written, if they have a Kong or they've got a tennis ball or they've got something that's not scented, that's not going to disrupt the course and make it inconsistent for following competitors, they're still able to use that. But maybe this rule does start to get people thinking about rewarding their dog when they're out training, but allowing the competitive environment of these events to be, where they're really pushing the dog and saying, "Hey, let's go to work, let's get our job done," and the reward happens when we come off the course. There's a couple of trains of thought there, but I did want to clarify because that is a question we get at the office pretty often is, well, are we still allowed to use toys on the course?
Yeah, and after we had this discussion about it, I experimented with a couple different things because I like to reward them. So I just stuck a rubber antler in the back of my pants and threw that at the end, and I've stuck a tennis ball in my pocket, and the dogs are just as happy they just want to chase something. Or, and other dogs are more food rewarded. Some are toy, motivated. So it still allows for some reward. And I even thought, well, you could reward them once you get off the course. But I think it's a good rule. And then another issue that came up, and this actually happened to me. I was judging, and there was a rule change on when a naturally occurring a shed that wasn't planted by the judge or planner is awarded. So what happened is I was judging, and there was a dog that had run a really good time, was in contention that day. We had stopped the run. We were finished doing the paperwork. The dog was off leash and just kind of milling around, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw it off the course, and all of a sudden, it comes running with an antler. I didn't know for sure if it was off the course, and I panicked for a second because I thought, oh no, we've stopped the clock too soon, and it would have been a bad situation because, like I said, this dog had run a contention time and did end up placing, but I panicked for a second. Come to find out, it was a spare antler that was retrieved, but it brought up two questions. We determined that after the panic was over, that antler came from off the course, but very close to the course. And then we were unsure of whether or not it was a naturally occurring shed, in other words, a wild drop. So the discussion was, how do we, we kind of wanted to clarify that a little bit. So in the rules, if a dog picks up a wild shed, and I've seen that happen too, it was a Kansas event. And I want to say maybe it was Brian Schloman and his dog. They found a wild shed, so it was scored. But we just wanted to clarify that a little bit. And the question is, if you don't know whether it came, because a lot of times you don't know where the dog came from. The whole idea is that if a dog, and a dog should be rewarded, they're doing what they're supposed to do. It's supposed to be on the course to be awarded. If it comes off course, it's not awarded if you clearly know that. If it's not clear, the clarification was that the benefit of the doubt should go to the dog, and it be scored. But again, that was just kind of by experience, clarifying that rule. And again, if you can't determine if it's a natural shed or maybe somebody's practice shed that they dropped or something, then I guess it's judge's discretion but the benefit should go to the dog. And I think that's a good rule that the dogs are doing what they're supposed to do. It's not their fault there's a spare shed out there. And of course, clubs should always try to make sure to check the area, make sure nobody's left a practice shed or something like that. But anyway, that was one of the other changes.
Yeah, and that's, like you said, it was mainly to express that what do we do if we don't know? And we do want to reward that dog for putting all that training to practice. And like you said, the judge also needs to have a little bit of fair discretion as well. Hey, was this dog gone for 5.5 minutes and handler's just hollering for him, and then we see him come from the wild blue yonder with a shed way off the course? Is that going to be scored? Well, they did what they're supposed to, but at the same time, is that dog exhibiting a level of control? Was that dog exhibiting the training that went into it? And so that's why it's not, hey, if your dog just comes back with an antler, it's scored. We still want it to be within the confines or nearby with that course. I just kind of felt like it was worth specifying there too, because one of the benefits of doing these podcasts is instead of losing some of our intention in the literature and in the text of the rulebook, we're able to kind of sit here and discuss things and express what the intention is behind them. So our judges and our competitors are able to use this as a resource and go, okay, that is what they meant. And so they can understand, if a judge makes a ruling, they can understand where that came
Alan, I know we both have new Dogtra Pathfinder 2s. How are you liking yours so far?
I'm liking it. I've even had the opportunity now to use mine where I didn't have service, where I download the map of that area, and it works flawlessly. Love it.
I agree. I really like my Dogtra Pathfinder 2 as well. I've used it quite a bit the past few months. I really like the crystal clear maps. I like that it doesn't lose service very much, and I don't have many bad things to say about it at all. Dogtra Pathfinder 2, the official GPS collar partner of UKC.
moving into one of the last changes we had for the season. It was mainly focused at our clubs. It was a club specification, and so the way we like to hold events is to benefit those competitors who are working a weekday job and they have to take the weekends off to travel and attend these events. And in order to preserve their ability to compete and preserve the field and the competitiveness of the field that these dogs are competing in, we did specify that weekday events, specifically Monday or Friday events, are only allowed, and they're only allowed as part of a 3-day weekend event that they're adjacent to, right? So for Monday, it's got to be Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and if it's a Friday, it's got to be Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And we brought this up to, again, preserve the opportunity for our competitors to compete and preserve the consistency and the competitiveness of the field. It might not be quite the same field if it's just a random Tuesday afternoon event.
Yeah, and that was the intent in the discussion. We wanted to, number one, have the competition there for the events so that all potential competitors have the ability to try to get to an event, and also to preserve the integrity of of titles and points that are earned, so that, you know, at least if it's a weekend, other competitors have the same ability to attend. Like you said, you know, a Tuesday afternoon might be a lot harder for most people than a Saturday, Sunday, and maybe a Monday or Friday that's adjacent to that. So that was just the idea behind that, is to prevent any Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday stray events.
Yep. And the way it's written currently, it limits these Shed Dog events to a 3-day max. That way, it's not a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday event, because that too could skew the competition, because it's going to be tough for somebody to get that long of a string of days off and keep that field consistent across those events. And when we talk about our titles, there are quite a few of our titles in the Shed Dog universe that are driven by first place podiums. And so we want to make sure that the dogs that are like Shade this past year, that earns a first place at nationals for a multiplier on their elite title, their elite title is worth the same as the dogs that are competing on the weekend. And it's not just, well, that dog earned its first place podium, but there's only 8 dogs there. It kind of skews things just a little bit. Not to diminish the value of some of our clubs that do just happen to have smaller events, but it prevents the ability for clubs to deliberately adjust the attendance for their events. Now, the next thing I have on my... Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to move on to the next thing, but if you had a caveat, I'm all ears.
No.
Well, the next thing I have on my sheet to discuss is probably going to be one of the probably going to be the longer part of our discussion here, and it's about the Dog of the Year points clarification. Understand the sport had a little bit of confusion there, and wanted to take the time to kind of sit down and talk through it. That way, everyone's on the same page and can really get after it this season. And that change is the number of passes that can count towards a dog's total Dog of the Year points cannot exceed the number of podiums they earn. So what that means is, if a dog goes to, and we have a little example on our website, but say a dog goes to 8 events, right? And they have 5 passes, but they only podiumed 3 times. We're only counting 3 of those pass points, which each pass point is 2 points. So we're only counting up to 6 points towards their total Dog of the Year points. And the idea behind that is to kind of bridge the gap between opportunity and ability or skill. And so what that means is, hey, if we have a highly competitive dog that we just can't make it to as many of events, but our dog is super consistent, it's always on the podium, that dog that has more podiums should beat a dog that gets the vast number of its points just from passes, because that dog is a more competitive dog. Jason, I kind of want to get your voice on it from a competitor's standpoint, and how you think this benefits those who are making a run for dog this year.
Well, as I said earlier, a lot of our discussions revolved around trying to make the Dog of the Year program as best as we can. And so there have been a lot of discussions and a lot of thoughts about how to do this. And the overall principle, the idea that we all agree on, is that we want to award dogs who are consistently, not just placing, but consistently doing it. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to achieve, and And so, but we also don't want to penalize people for just going to events. So it was hard to strike a balance, because a dog that goes to, we didn't want to, we thought, well, look, this is something that's prestigious. You should have to work for it. So there, you have to put a little bit of, tread on the tires and wear it off a little bit to go to these. But at the same time, we don't want to make it where it's not feasible for the majority of competitors that want to compete. So what we wanted to do was come up with a way to award the dogs that are most consistently earning podium finishes, because I think we all agreed that's the dog that should receive some kind of award, as opposed to a dog that maybe goes to every dog of the year event but never podiums. The dog that more consistently earns a podium finish should be awarded. So that's, and it's you have to think about it. When we first discussed this system, I had to run it through my head, and some people say, well, why don't you just only allow you to get points if you podium? Well, that's a possibility, but at the same time, a dog that's going and earning placement, or not placements, but just passes, I mean, they're doing something, so they shouldn't be totally penalized for that. But we didn't want a dog to be able to, out point, get more points than a dog that more consistently placing. And I hope that makes sense. That was the overall principle behind it. So in other words, I think the term that has been going around in the shed dog community is, people say, well, it's still a tailgate race. It was the talk last year when people would talk to me about it. I'd say, well, yeah, maybe a little, but not as bad, because it's, first of all, last season we set the events to, specific events you got to go to, whereas before that, you could go anywhere. We wanted to concentrate the competition and limit the events that you could earn points at, and that was a huge step forward. But the geographic area of our competitors is so large that it was still somewhat of a tailgate race to try to get to all of them. And if you could, and most people just honestly can't do that. In our sport, in the retriever world, you have professional handlers and trainers that, load a 20 hole trailer, and, we don't have that in our sport. So it's usually just the people with their own dogs traveling, and most people can't afford to simply do that. So if somebody could, that seemed to be a little bit unfair, and we like I said, we wanted to award the dogs that were consistently placing. So hopefully what this does is, you can still get some pass points, but the more emphasis is going to be placed on earning podium finishes, so that hopefully a dog that more consistently earning podiums will be ranked higher up than a dog who only earns passes.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where your pass points, the points that you earn just simply from passing, need to be backed up with your dog's ability to end up on the podium. And when we looked at the past few years, that's kind of a trend, is that these dogs are having close to 50% podium rate. Now, where they fall on the podium tends to be different, but I'll use Tundra this past year. I mean, of her total points, half of them were from podiums, and she had an equal number of podium placements to the number of passes. And you looked at some of the top 10 dogs; a lot of them are pretty similar to that as well. And so it's not intended to drastically change what the lineup is, but like you said, it's meant to help bridge that gap from those super consistent dogs that just don't get the opportunity of people who do go to more events, to allow them to shine through. And maybe they don't win Dog of the Year, but they put up a fight throughout the season. And this change is specifically only for the working and the champion class. It's not the same for our non-retriever breeds. That probably put them at a pretty severe disadvantage and kind of be unfair for them. And so we maintain the same structure for that class. And also when we talk about our youth handlers, that this has no bearing on our Youth of the Year series as well. Well, I don't know how we did it, but we managed to sum up one of those 5-hour-long conversations in under an hour. So, doing pretty good there. Jason can definitely attest to the amount of time that we put in having these discussions. And some of these they're hard topics to discuss because we want to do what's right for the sport, and we don't want to negatively affect it in any way. And so this, it's one of those things that it's a younger sport, and I think we're really narrowing in on getting it all polished up and rolling for future years.
Yeah, and I, like I said, that's one of the things that we're constantly trying to do is do what's best for the sport overall. And so sometimes in these discussions where you have to step back and, okay, where are we at? So, but that's been the goal, and they have been long conversations, and I'm thankful for Scott and Jeff, Todd, and yourself for putting in the time to help make this sport better. I love it, and I think that most of the other people do as well. So,
yeah, I think we keep hearing more and more positive feedback, and I mentioned it in our little news item here where we outline these rule changes. But the individuals of our advisory board are available to our competitors as well. If they come up with an idea and they're like, hey, I really think this might help the sport, or hey, I think one of these rule changes is having this effect on participation, on the quality of dogs being titled, what have you. We seriously consider that, and I try to make sure that people know that us as a UKC, we're always open to that input as well. We like hearing from you guys. We like to hear from our competitors because it allows us to be truly driven by these sports and driven by the dogs that are doing more out in the field. And it makes it better for everybody. It makes it more fun for our competitors. Makes life easier on us if everyone's happy with the sport. I mean, we don't get as many aggravated phone calls, which is always good. And so our doors are open. Our advisors are here. If you catch them at a Shed Dog event, we want your input. And so never hesitate to reach out if you have any sort of constructive criticism for our Shed Dogs.
Yeah, and that's been happening. It's been for a few years. People, I don't know why, but I've always been engaged. And when I go to events, get engaged in rule discussions, or even sometimes somebody just messages me. And I always write down whatever somebody says. In these advisory meetings, I've brought things up sometimes. Even if I didn't necessarily agree with it, I always thought, well, somebody brought this to me, so I'll tell everybody else in case I'm the crazy one. But I would, I definitely, if anybody wants to share something with me, I'll share it along with the rest of the group.
Absolutely, and even though we're still in the start of the season, I've already gotten a couple of emails and have them written down in my notes for all of us to discuss for season 9, or if something comes up that needs to be adjusted in the middle of the season, then we adjust it. We'll do what's best for the sport always, and that's the ultimate goal. Well, Jason, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to sit down with us, discuss it. We always joke about we end up getting caught up when we're discussing these rules, thinking too much like a lawyer and reading too much into things. So being able to have these discussions where we can kind of open up our minds and open up the train of thought a little bit behind these changes, I think it makes it better for our competitors, and I hope they enjoy them as well to kind of get a glimpse into our thought process when we make changes.
Yeah, the lawyer jokes flow when we're having these meetings.
That's certain. Well, Jason, thank you again for taking the time to be on here, and we hope everyone listening has enjoyed this episode.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the UKC Hunting Ops Podcast. Be sure to give us a follow so you don't miss any of our new episodes or content.